Arnold Falder here for AF Tutorials with another episode of our little animation series in 3ds Max. If you haven't checked out the first 2 episodes, definitely do that. I'm going to give you a link on the top right here. This episode we're going to take a look at some necessary animation techniques for creating mechanical animations, and that's why the title is called Mechanical Animation 1. So let's start with another simple animation, and that is in here in my top view. I'm going to maximize it. In my top view I'm going to create 3 spheres. I'm going to create first one, a second one, and a third one. And those spheres, I made them large, medium, and small, because the first thing that I would like to show you is how to link and unlink objects. Linking objects, you could compare it to something like the sun, the earth, and the moon. So the sun is orbiting, the earth is orbiting around the sun, and the moon is orbiting around the earth. So in this case we're going to create a chain of links in which we link the moon to the earth and the sun and the earth to the sun, and we'll see what happens. Linking is done with those 2 tools up here. There is a select and link, and there is an unlink selection tool. I would like to start with the select and link tool, and I'm going to select the smallest one, the moon. I'm going to select it. Let me zoom in here. Select it, click and hold my mouse, and you will have a rubber band, and then you go on top of the second sphere and drop it. It will blink up, and then you can then those 2 objects are linked. Before I continue with linking the earth to the sun, I'm going to show you what that means. If I now select the earth and move it, the moon will always follow. That not only applies to movement, also to other transformations like rotation. So if I rotate the earth, the moon will follow, or even, of course, also 3-dimensionally, and also scale it. So if I scale it larger, it will scale the moon. When I do something like this, I always hit escape in order to keep the same size or the same rotation angle that I had before. So that is just me demonstrating it. At the end of such a thing, it's always at the same size or position or rotation angle as we started. So, but when I move the earth and the moon follows, but what if I move the moon and you will see that the earth is not following. It is also sometimes referred to as parent and child. So in this case the parent would be the earth, and the moon would be the child. So when the child is always following the parent, but if I move the child alone, nobody's following. So I'm going to continue, and I'm going to create a chain out of it, and therefore I'm going to use the select and link one more time, and I'm going to take the earth, click and hold your mouse, use the rubber band and drop it onto the large sphere, and now I have a chain of links, the moon to the earth and the earth to the sun, all linked. So now if I move the sun, obviously all the 2 other follow. If I move the earth, only the moon follows, and if I move the moon alone, and nothing else follows. So in this way it's a chain of links. Okay, so the dependencies of those children and parents can also be viewed here in the this is not, I just realized that this is not the this is actually not the Scene Explorer. Those are the layers. I just closed it. There is no? Yes, like this. Okay, so that was the layer explorer before that I had open here. Now it's the Scene Explorer. The difference in the Scene Explorer is that the Scene Explorer actually shows you those 3 children and parents. Shows them their hierarchy. So whenever you see sphere 1, the sun, and then you can see it is a son of it, that's a child of the first one, and that is a child of the second one. So now if the linking is done, we can also try the unlink. So if I, for example, take the child here, the moon, and hit unlink, then you can see it is suddenly on the same level as the first one, so as the sun. And also take this one and unlink it, and now nothing is linked with nothing, and we only have 3 independent objects. One more time to create the chain of links. You start with the first one, hold and drop, select this one, hold and drop on it, and now we have again those 3 children. Now the next concept that I would like to show you is the usage of dummies. And when I mean dummies, a dummy is a simple object that is not rendering and not showing at all. You could use any object as a dummy. For example, I could also use this one as a dummy, and when I render it, I just have to make sure that I either right click, hide it, so hide selection, unhide all, or if I just make sure it's not renderable. So when I rendered right now, you can see I have 3 spheres. This sphere, I could also go to the object properties, and I could just hit the button, unclick the button renderable. Okay, and now for example, if I render the view, this one would not be rendered, and it's just the same concept as a dummy. But so that you don't have to change the object properties for every dummy, there is an extra object that is called dummy, and you'll find it under create and helpers. It's the triangular ruler here, helpers, and you will find dummy, the very first one. The dummy, if you pull it drag it up into your scene, it is a simple box. Let's go into a perspective view so we'll see it a little bit better. So the dummy is a green box. And of course, when you hit render, a dummy will never be rendered. The dummy has its pivot point, and the pivot point is the center where all the axes, X, Y, and Z axes are placed. The pivot point has its pivot point in the center. The spheres also have it in their center, but for example, a box or a pyramid, they don't have it in the center. They have it in the center of their ground plane, ground face. Here is the dummy with the center, the pivot point in the center. So go back to a top view. What are we going to use it for? For example, if I would like to link objects to, for example, I would like to have those 3 objects animated at the same time. First, remember they are still linked, so that's why I select them all and hit unlink. So now I'm selecting all 3 objects and link it to the dummy. So I can do it 3 at the same time, select 3 objects, click and hold, and now I have 3 rubber bands, and I'll drop it onto the dummy. So now the dummy is the parent. When I move it, all objects are following, but I can individually animate those objects. That is very good, because now I have 2 levels of possibilities to animate my objects. For example, here in AutoKey, I could wildly animate my 3 spheres. I'm just doing some weird movements. So, almost done. Yeah, that's it. So here is my animation of all the 3 objects are moving individually around, and now if I want to animate the whole scene and move it from one place to another, I can just take the dummy and animate the dummy to go from here to here to here. So see, and now play. the dummy is animated, they follow the dummy, but they do their own thing. So with this, with a dummy, and maybe in some situations maybe a dummy linked to a dummy linked to something else, that is a good way of animating an object. Another thing that I would like to show you, for example, if you would animate a door. So let me quickly, here's a small box. Let's say that is a door. Let's make it look like a door. If you would want to animate a door being opened or closed, you cannot simply take the door itself and animate it, because when you rotate it, you will find out that the pivot point is in the center, and that is not the way a usual door is rotating, because the usual door has its hinges on one side, and that's how it's opening. You could move the pivot point. I'm going to show you how to do that later, but for right now it is much simpler to animate the opening of a door, and I'm looking from the top down, to simply place a dummy, create a dummy here, right there where the door would open. The size of the dummy doesn't matter. I usually make them a little bit larger because I can easily grab them, and also the height of the dummy doesn't matter. It can be here on the floor. So now if I take the door and link it to the dummy, I can simply animate the opening of the door by animating the dummy. Okay? So in this case, the door and the door hinges, you don't necessarily need to have a dummy to do that. You could also, let me delete the dummy quickly. You could also use some parts of the geometry. For example, I'm gonna create a small cylinder. So here's a small cylinder that is actually placed where the door usually has its hinges. So there's one here, and one up there. So 3 door hinges. And now if I would like to animate the door opening, I would just select the door and link it to one of those hinges. And now if I take this little hinge here, it will open. When I rotate it, it opens the whole door. So not always you need a dummy, but sometimes it's enough to use parts of the geometry to animate. For example, the large open door can be animated by animating this little hinge here. Okay, so that is with using of dummies. I would like to show you something else. If you now look from the top again, and I will create a cylinder. It's just a small cylinder. I don't need actually 5 height segments, but I don't see them anyway. But I need a couple more sides. Let's go for 32 to make it more smoothly looking. And here's my cylinder, and I'm going to place a tiny box here. So cylinder and box. Yes. The question is, now if I link the box to the cylinder, to the wheel, let's call it a wheel. Let's link the box to the wheel. And now when I rotate the wheel, obviously the box follows. So the box's position changes, and it rotates with the wheel, but it also rotates itself. It also rotates locally, and that is something that I would like to show you. So first you link something, and now what you do is when you select the box and you go to motion. Oh, I'm sorry, hierarchy. Hierarchy and link info. So select the box, go to hierarchy, that's the 3rd tab here, and not pivot and or IK, but link info, and here's something that is quite helpful, and that is, now I have the box is selected, and the box inherits movement, rotation, and scale. And now what if I unclick rotation? So it does not get any rotation. That means if I select my wheel now and I rotate it, see, then it always stays parallel to X and Y. It gets a different position from rotation, but it's not inheriting the rotation. And the same thing can be done to movement and of course to scale. So if you have linked objects and for some reason you don't want all of the parameters, move, rotate and scale, be transferred to the child, you can break the links just by saying, okay, you don't inherit any rotation or you don't inherit any scaling and so on. Okay? That is, I'll show you a practical example for that, and let's delete the box quickly. Here is my wheel, and on the wheel I'm going to place a dummy right here. So something we don't see, a dummy, and on the dummy I'm going to place a box. Yeah, it's not important that they intersect. I'm just looking from the top. We could fix that. Now, okay, let's fix it. So like this, make the height a bit smaller, something like this. So if I don't want to use the dummy, I could also, I'm going to delete the dummy and use another object instead. As I mentioned before, for example, a little cylinder like this that both looks as if it's part of the geometry, or and can also serve as a dummy. Now I'm going to link this little part of the geometry to the wheel, because whenever I rotate the wheel, I want this little axle to follow. So link and link it to the wheel. And now the bar or the stick that goes out, I'm going to link it to this axis. Again, look from the top. If I now rotate my wheel, you'll notice this is how it looks like. Now, if I tell this little, for example, this stick here, hierarchy, and do not inherit any rotation, especially not around the Z-axis, but in this case I'm just going to remove all the things. You will notice that that is not right, because now it is not inheriting any rotation, but it weirdly moves. So that's why my dummy, or in this case my little axis, this is the point where I have to break the linking of the rotation. So select this piece and unclink the rotation, and now you'll see it works like a mechanical part, like something that would turn the movement of a locomotive wheel to the cylinder and to the steam engine and so on. So that is a principle that you can either do with a dummy, so I could have used a dummy here instead, or a part of the geometry, in this case my little axis. Okay? Then the next example. Let's create a box, tall box, and a tall cylinder. So they're approximately the same height. It doesn't matter how tall they are. You can anytime. we will soon connect the two. What we're going to do is we're going to use a concept called wire parameters. Basically, we're going to take the value of one object, in this case the height of the box, and wire it, like make a connection to the height of the cylinder. And that means whenever I change the height of the box, the cylinder will follow. And how does that work? You select your cylinder, you select your box, sorry, make a right click and find the dialog wire parameters. With wire parameters, it asks you you can only wire one parameter at a time. So in this case, which parameter do you want to wire? The object's height. Here is my rubber band again, and with the rubber band, I click onto the cylinder, and which parameter do I want to link it to? Not linking, wiring it to the object's height. That opens the wire parameter wiring dialog, and here is the box 1's height will be linked to the cylinder 1's height. Now you can define in which direction it's linked. So is it going to link both ways or one way only? I'm going to make one way only, so only from the box to the cylinder. So I choose this way and choose connect. Okay, there it is. Now nothing changed, only the two now have the same height. So when I select my box, and the box can be simply animated. I can change its height, and as soon as I change the height, then you can imagine that the height can also be animated. If I change the height, the other will change the same. If I click on the cylinder, you will see that the height is not changeable because the parameter for the height, somebody else is defining it, in this case the height of the box. Okay? Quite simple to wire two parameters. Let's do it again. For example, I'm right click, wire parameters. I'm going to wire the height, which we had before, also to the object's radius. So if I again the same direction from the box to the cylinder this way, only you can see that it already does the radius. So the height of the box is to the radius there, cylinder radius height this way, and I'm going the height is a little too much, so what I'm doing is I'm choosing height divided by 5, because the height is a little bit more, even 10. So, and connect. So now I have the height of my box not only connected to the height, but also to the radius, but 10 times smaller. So the height divided by 10 is the radius of my cylinder. And when you already have two objects wired, as in this case, if you want to see the dialog without wiring two new parameters, you can anytime select your object and go to the animation drop-down menu, and you will find both wiring new parameters plus the existing wired parameter dialog window, and you can open up here, and then you can find it. The box's height, for example, is wired to, and you can search which parameter it's wired to. You can see it's wired to 2, it's wired to the radius and wired to the height. And for example, the radius thing, I didn't like that, so I could go in here and disconnect the height and the radius, and from now on, yeah, the height is not wired anymore. Oh, sorry, the radius is not influenced anymore. That's why we have can adjust it by ourselves. Okay, so that concept, the wiring of parameters, can be used for something quite funny to work with, and it is again a kind of dummy concept. So you have an animation on an object, and you kind of remote control it with something else. In this case, the box controls the cylinder, but we want to do something else, and that is we're going to use sliders. And therefore, I'm going to create a box, give it a couple of height segments, not a couple like 10. The height segments are and what I did is I pressed the F4 button on my keyboard to turn on the height segments. So here are a couple of height segments, and what I'm gonna add is I'm gonna give the box a bend modifier. So select the box, go to modify and choose bend modifier. This is something that you should be already familiar, hopefully, in 3ds Max. So bend allows you to bend the object in a certain direction. So that is the how the angle that you bend the object. The direction is in which direction you're going to bend it. I'm going to leave that to 0. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of sliders, and the sliders, you will find them under under create helpers, but not under the standard helpers where the dummy was, but it's called manipulators. So create helpers and then switch to manipulators, and here you will find a slider, and you just click into your scene once, but we'll just do one slider at a time. So here it is, and now when you go to modify, you can manipulate the slider. First I'm going to call it bend value, because it's how much the bending is, and you can see the bend value right now, it's around 45 degrees, so basically goes from 0 to 90 degrees. So the value right now is 45, the minimum is 0, the maximum is 90. What is X position and Y position? That is the position on screen. So when you check that, you'll see it moves its position. The width is how wide is it. So I'm going to make it a little bit wider, 200. Then the screen is, and I'm going to move it up on the screen and here. Okay? Bend value. And it will snap to 1 degrees. So when I rotate it to 1 degrees. Here's my first slider, and I'm going to set a yeah, that's it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire the parameters of the slider, which is just from left to right, from 0 to 190, and I'm going to wire it to the bending of the box. So you select your slider, right mouse click, wire parameters. I want to take the object value, that's the value of when you move the slider, that is the value, so object slider value, and now we have a rubber band. Don't be confused that it is that it doesn't have its pivot point here, it has its pivot point at the origin. And now you click on the box and go to the modified, bending, and the angle in this case. So now the value of the slider will be only one direction, from the value to the angle, and connect. Here we go. And now how do you work with, so I could have different sliders down here, one for the height of the box, one for the bending, one for the amount of segments. And in order to work with the slider, what you need to know is you need to switch your view, here is one. Here's a button. You cannot do it with move. So changing the value of the slider is not a move thing. You have to do it with select and manipulate. And when you hit select and manipulate, you can change the slider. And that means when I change the value of the slider, it goes from 0, no bending, to 90 degrees bending. So when I want to animate my object to be animated, I just animate the slider, and the value of the slider will be wired directly to my box. Let's do a second slider quickly. Create a slider, just click into the scene, go to modify, call it segments. Right now I have 12 height segments, so I'm gonna set it to 12 as start value, but it can go from 1, because that's the minimum of possible values, from 1 to 20. So everything from 1 to 20 is possible. It will snap to even numbers, to 1, and I'm gonna place my, let's make the slider also 200 wide, and let's make it bring it up there, up there and to the same position as the other one approximately. So there it is, and now this slider, right click, wire parameters, its value to, click on the box, modified, bend, oh sorry, that's not the bend, that's box, height segments. Value to height segments this way, connect, and there it is. So now we have a slider, and if I want to manipulate it, I have to be in manipulate slider, and let's bend it a little bit more, and then you see when I bend it, I can adjust the amount of segments, and when it's bent, of course, with 3 segments, it doesn't look as smooth as if it would have 20 segments. So if you spend some time in setting up, in rigging your scene with all kinds of sliders, for example, you have some animation objects, a robot arm or some other mechanical parts, and you set up a set of sliders with wiring the parameters to the right to the right values, and also make sure minimum and maximum is set correctly, then you can just animate the whole scene just by using those sliders. Okay, so I could add one for the direction, in which direction it's bent, and so on. Okay, that is what I wanted to cover in this session. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. If you want to see some additional topics covered, make sure you write it down in the comments. For this time, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.